Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I attempt to answer your automotive questions and sometimes butcher your names. Apologies for that in advance. A few things before we get started. I will be taking the questions in this show from the Google Plus event on my Google Plus page. There's links just about everywhere to that if you wish to post a question. If you're watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those questions that are posted there. Therefore, I will not be answering those questions. Once the show concludes, half hour-ish or so, I will no longer be answering questions on the Google Plus live show. However, the next live show looks like it will be on the 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if I don't get a chance to get to your question today, you can try again in a couple of weeks. Although, in between, in the interim, you can always go to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a wealth of resources there that I've left for you to get answers to your automotive questions. I suggest you first start by checking out the FAQ page. Then we have this wonderful friendly form to post individual questions if you want to take that route. Free to sign up for. Just got to do what you got to do. Anyway, now that we've got the pleasantries out of the way, I like to try to answer as many of these questions as I possibly can. So I'm just going to jump in and get started, if that's okay with you. By the way, Happy New Year. Hope you had a good break time off. Hope you had some time off. I remember working on holidays. Yeah, that sucked. Lewis Gallen, hey Eric, I posted on your forum as well as others, but nobody seems to have an answer. I'm hoping you can help. I have an 05 Explorer XLT and it has a rhythmic thumping coming from the front. Doesn't matter if I'm going fast or slow, the sound becomes faster and slower depending on speed. I've also noticed that making sharp turns like in a parking lot, the truck will hop a bit as if I ran over something. Not sure if the two things are related. Only things done so far are the replacement of the front bearings. Haven't driven the truck since the issue started for fear it might break down on me. Any ideas, Eric? Thanks. Yes, a couple of things come to mind first thing off the bat. Number one, tires. Almost always in these situations, tires are suspect. The easiest way to determine if it is a tire issue is rotate the tires front to back, take it for a drive and see if the issue is still there. Now, it's also interesting that you mention the hopping as you turn. That usually indicates that the four-wheel drive is engaged. I believe that has like an automatic four-wheel drive system. Perhaps there's something going on there. It's hard to say, but you really shouldn't have four-wheel drive active on dry pavement. It should be at least wet pavement and inclement weather. That's what it's used for. But on dry pavement, if you try to make tight turns in particular, you will experience that hopping that you're having there. So perhaps the four-wheel drive is engaged. Maybe you haven't engaged. Disengage it if you do. But as far as a thumping noise, I would say check the tires out and rotate them front to back and see if that is still there. Andre, Eric has, hi Eric, I have a Honda CRV 2003. I installed an aftermarket radio. After finished install, I noticed that the illuminating light on the climate control stopped working. I check all the fuse, none of them are burned out. I replaced the bulb and still nothing. What I would suggest that you do in that instance is unplug the radio and see if the condition still exists. Depending upon how you wired it up, if you hardwired it into the harness in there, I prefer the connectors that wire into the back of the radio and into the vehicle harness. That way you're not disturbing the vehicle harness at all and everything gets hooked up the way it should get hooked up, because the illumination circuit also goes into the radio itself. So maybe wires got crossed somewhere. So to verify that, if you remove the radio from the system, if your climate control lights work at that time, you've wired something up incorrectly. Check the wiring for your aftermarket radio. See if you can't get that sorted out. And hopefully that will solve that problem. Electron Pusher, I pronounced that one right, has a 1994 Crown Vic and he's having trouble determining if the car is worth tuning up if the transmission is on the way out. It hesitates on acceleration from about 30 miles an hour to 50 miles per hour intermittently and feels like the car shakes when shifting gear. Perhaps more importantly, it feels like it's slipping into neutral for a second or two every once in a while, every few hundred miles. The check engine light also comes on, but only after driving for quite a while. The speedometer seems to be very unreliable. There are no OBD1 codes, which seems odd considering the check engine light. Do you think it's possible it's not the transmission? Or is it worth putting on a new drive belt, filter, etc. into it? P.S. The transmission fluid is pink-red with no bubbles. I've topped it off and added Lucas stop slip. Also, it seems like if I floor the accelerator, the transmission shifts better and the car accelerates perfectly. It's only problematic when accelerating slowly. Okay, thank you for that detailed description. That's actually quite helpful. Check engine light, that would be the way to start. I know you say you don't have codes, but I believe on those older pre-OBD2 vehicles, Ford had like a sort of its own little scan tool breakout box kind of thing. Actually, a viewer sent me one of these. I have it at my shop. That may be a better option than, I'm not really sure how you're pulling codes, but I'm sure that if there's a check engine light, then it's very likely there's a code stored somewhere. And getting them in older OBD1 vehicles can be a challenge, but I suggest you look into seeing what you can do to pull that code. That being said, you said your speedometer is not working properly and your transmission seems to not be shifting properly. That may be the crux of the whole thing, because even though it's a 94, I believe it still has some electronic components that allow it to shift. And if it doesn't know how fast it's going or what speed it's going, it's not going to be able to shift properly. That's why I suggest you go in and try to pull those check engine light codes. You may have one for a speed sensor. If that's the case, track down that problem and repair it, and then see if you still have a shifting problem then, because those electronically shifted transmissions need to know how fast the vehicle is going in order to set the shift points correctly. So you may not have a bad transmission. I mean, all other signs that you're talking about here with good fluid at a good level doesn't really seem to indicate that there's an internal transmission problem. There still could be, but on a vehicle that old, I would expect to see, dirty transmission fluid bubbles, just something else with the transmission fluid that might indicate an internal problem. But the fact that you have a jumping speedo, a check engine light, and a transmission that's not shifting well, that's the direction I would take with that one. Okay, Bobby Greger, 2008 Chevy Trailblazer with 146,000 miles. Could a bad wheel bearing throw off my traction control system? The speed sensor is built into it. Part of the speed sensor is built into it. In fact, it's not exactly the speed sensor that's built into it. The speed sensor is on the outside. What's inside the bearing, I believe, is an assembly with a tone ring or something like that. To answer your question, technically, yes, it could. But it would really have to be bad, like really bad, like moving the wheel kind of bad in order for that to happen. So it's something that can happen, but more information is needed here. Do you have an ABS light, and does that ABS light indicate a problem with a speed sensor somewhere? So there's more information I need here to give you enough information, but technically, yes, that could cause an ABS code to come on. February 1999 Accord V6 sedan. When turning the steering wheel or going over bumps, the front suspension creaks, especially when it's really cold. I'm suspecting lower ball joints. Could worn lower ball joints cause the steering wheel to become hard to turn? Thanks for your hard work. Actually, I believe you're 100% correct on the lower ball joints causing the noise. In fact, that's the most common cause of that. Now, I'll let you in a little secret. There was a TSB at the Acura dealership when I worked years ago about issues like this happening with higher end vehicles, and they would creak when going over bumps. So rather than, because it was warranty, rather than replacing the ball joints, what they recommended that we do was disconnect them from the suspension and, how did they word it? I think they worded it as massage them. So in other words, you disconnect it from the suspension and you take the ball joint and you move it all around and reinstall it, and that repositions the lubricant on the inside of the joint and the noise goes away. Surprisingly, that actually worked. Now, your car is older, obviously. However, hey, it's worth a shot. Could save you the money as far as replacing a ball joint. You might just try it just for the heck of it. As for worn ball joints causing the steering to get stiff, not really. Now, if the lubrication goes away and it's rusted into place, which I have seen, yes, that could increase the steering effort. However, if the ball joint is worn and loose, it's actually going to make it steer easier. Now, if you're having problems steering your Accord, 8 times out of 10, it's a problem with the fluid. Hondas, you really have to use Honda fluid in the power steering system. If you don't, I've almost always seen problems result. So I'm really animate about using Honda power steering fluid in a Honda power steering system. A lot of times, if there is an issue, it has to do with the fluid. I've got a video out there about how to change the fluid, how to flush the fluid out. I would recommend, if you're having a steering issue like this, flush the fluid out, put fresh Honda fluid in, see what happens. Also, give that thing with ball joints a try. Like I said, it could save you some time and effort by doing it that way. George Burkhard, Burkhard. Hi, Eric. I have a valve question. We always hear that loose valves tick more and hit the valve harder, causing wear, while tight valves result in the valve being open too long, resulting in overheating and potentially burning the valve. But what are some performance effects of valves being too tight, too loose, i.e. power, fuel economy, emissions, etc.? Okay, valve adjustments, that is a fine-tuning thing. You're talking about thousandths of an inch, fractions of a millimeter that you're talking about. Technically, you're correct in what you're saying, especially with valves being too tight. That is the worst. If valves are loose, I don't believe it accelerates wear any more than normal. And I've had a great deal of experience with this because Hondas have solid valve trains. I've been adjusting valves for, geez, almost 20 years now. But that being said, you want them loose rather than tight. It's better to hear them than smell them, is what we used to say. As far as affecting performance, the thing that adjusted valves seem to affect the most is idle and the smoothness of the engine. It's all about balance. You have several cylinders that all need to contribute the same amount. If the valves are adjusted a little bit off on each one of the cylinders, that cylinder is not going to produce the same power as its neighbor. And as a result, it becomes a bit unbalanced, particularly in four cylinders. Four cylinders are inherently shaky engines to begin with. They fire every 180 degrees. So it's really choppy. They're not smooth. V6s, really smooth. V8s got a nice burble to them. They've got just like this 45-degree offset. And five cylinders, I love the sound of my Vigor 5-cylinder, every 120 degrees. So that's somewhere in the middle there. But anyway, all that being said, valve adjustments, if they're off, cause more like a shaky idle condition and the smooth operation of the engine. And it's fine tuning. I can't stress that enough. It's not going to solve a problem necessarily when you adjust the valves. A lot of times it just makes something you've already done better. I did valve adjustments in addition to major services and tune-ups and things. And, you know, across the board, they ran better. In fact, over vacation, I did this very thing to my mother-in-law's car. She's very happy with the way it's running. It's a 2004 Civic, by the way. So I hope that answers your question. But honestly, if you don't have a lot of experience adjusting valves, proceed with caution because you could cause a lot of damage if you don't get it right. And as I said, you'd rather hear them than smell them. So if you don't hear anything and you got a really rough idle, go back and adjust them looser because you probably got them too tight. Steve Z has two cars with high mileage. One is a 99 Chevy Lumina 3.1 with 220,000 miles, and the other an 84 Ford Thunderbird 5-liter with 125,000 miles. Is it worth it to use more expensive oil that has additives for high mileage engines such as zinc? Or should I continue to use regular conventional oil? Both cars run fine and use very little oil between oil changes. High mileage oil doesn't necessarily contain more zinc. Actually, that's something you want when you're breaking in an engine. What high mileage oils contain, which I've been sold on this concept. I actually talked to some of the engineers at Valvoline. I've got a video about this that I'll post down in the description. And also, I'll throw this out there for the rest of you watching. There will be additional information, videos mentioned, things like that, down in the description of the video. So if you have a question about something, check the description. There's quite possibly an answer there. Anyway, when I spoke to them, what they told me, the main thing about high mileage oil was the seal conditioners, because I had brought up to them, in my experience in the past, you take an older vehicle like what you're talking about here, and you put synthetic oil in it after running conventional oil for a long period of time. Sometimes, and man, I had a hard time with these engineers about this. And I've talked to more people than just Valvoline. I've actually talked to people with Mobil 1. I've also talked to people with Shell, all about this, because I've got a lot of questions about oil, and I've tried to fill my head with as much stuff as I can. I'm rambling on. Anyway, what I've seen happen on higher mileage vehicles is you put synthetic oil in, and all of a sudden, the seals start to leak. And sometimes the engine gets noisy. But this is how I got the engineers to sort of come around to my experiences. And I said to them, okay, we're talking about an engine that probably already has a lot of buildup inside of it, probably already has years of neglect within it. So there's a lot of deposits, a lot of buildup inside of it. You put synthetic oil in an engine of this type, and all the gunk that's basically sealing the engine up suddenly goes away because the synthetic oil is doing its job. There's detergents in there that help clean up the gunk and trap it inside. And, you know, it's really highly technical molecular engineering stuff that they're doing. Anyhow, it goes in, it does this, it does its job so well that the gunk that was sealing those seals suddenly goes away. And now the oil is able to slip through. I've also said in the past that the synthetic oil it's slicker. It tends to, even though it's the same viscosity, it tends to flow better. And as a result, if you've got the smallest leak, it becomes something of a larger leak as a result. Now, based on your description, you use very little oil between oil changes. Give it a try. I say give high mileage oil a try. It is a synthetic blend, but as I said, seal conditioners. And those seal conditioners, what happens with rubber seals over time, particularly with oil, this is kind of what it breaks down to. Over time, especially if you don't change your oil on a regular basis, oil develops sulfuric and carbonic acid within it. And this eats away at the rubber and the seals and makes them hard. Sometimes so hard and brittle that the minute you touch them, they break apart. I've seen oil seals do this quite often, especially on engines that were neglected. Now, the seal conditioners can go in there and help keep the seals pliable and working correctly, such as your crankshaft seals, both on the front and back, and camshaft seals, things like that. These are the first things that come to my mind. I know that was kind of a long-winded explanation, but that's a really deep question that you have there. Like I said, watch the video that I'll post a link to in the description about, when I sat down with the engineers at Valvoline and see what they have to say about it. Like I said, I really had to sort of twist their arm to get it out of them that sometimes putting synthetic oils in high mileage neglected engines can cause them to leak more and become noisy as a result. That gunk is also helping to keep the engine quiet. Once that gunk is gone and those metal parts and those clearances become what they actually are, well, that's when the noise starts and sometimes the leaks along with it. Hard question to answer, if I'm honest. Rick Martin. Hi, Eric. Thank you for all the great videos. 95 Honda Odyssey, 190,000 miles, radiator hose blew and engine overheated. Started getting bubbles in the radiator, pulled the head, cleaned it, checked the block for straightness, installed with new gaskets. Now white exhaust smoke all the time. Now white exhaust smoke all the time. No bubbles in the radiator, so I'm thinking head gaskets cracked between the valves. I also inspected the block and it didn't see any cracks. Wouldn't it be more likely to crack in the head since the crack in the block would be through the aluminum and the steel sleeve? Intake manifold just has a small opening in the side that runs coolant from the head to the thermostat, so I doubt that. So do you think replace the head? Thanks. Also tried bars to stop leak to try to fix up any cracks, and it didn't help. Rick, thank you for watching the show and thank you for your question. But in some ways, you are exemplifying the very thing that I try to avoid. If you have bubbles in the coolant, it doesn't mean you have a bad head gasket necessarily. The first thing to check for whenever you have an overheat condition like that is air in the cooling system, especially after you've done any kind of service, especially on a Honda. Hondas, for whatever reason, the design of the cooling system tends to trap air. If you just finish your repairs and top off the radiator, put the radiator cap on and drive down the road, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a problem with overheating, intermittent heat, and problems such as bubbles in your cooling system. On that engine, it's not common for it to have a head gasket problem. It is more common for it to have a problem with, say, the head warping if it does get severely overheated. But that uses a steel gasket. And anytime you have a steel gasket, very rarely do I see head gasket issues. I see head gasket issues on those thick graphite coated things. That's where I see head gasket issues happen, such as on the Legends, the Acura Legends, the V6, 3.2 and 3.5 liter Acura V6 that used those gaskets. But later models of that engine, they switched to the steel gaskets and the problem kind of went away. So steel gaskets used on that engine oftentimes don't leak. I suspect through removing your head, cleaning, doing what you're doing, that you may have inadvertently caused a problem, especially, like I said, steel gaskets. There can be no blemishes on the surface of the head or the cylinder block at all. So if you went in there with sandpaper or something abrasive and basically scored the block or scored the head, that could be the cause of the problem that you're having now. It's really, not to mention, the torquing and everything that goes involved with this. In fact, I did a video about don't make my life more difficult with a problem exactly like this with the exact same engine that somebody had gone in and done virtually almost the same things that you had done and actually caused the problems with the engine. And I suspect that the engine wasn't having that issue before, that it was just air in the cooling system. It saddens me to report this to you at this juncture because you've already gone through this time and effort. And yeah, I'm sorry for that, but You may have inadvertently caused a problem by doing this, since you didn't mention that it was causing the white smoke before you did the work. So at this point, a machine shop may be your best friend to let you know whether there's issues with that cylinder head, and that's what I would start with, because that's the easiest thing to remove. If the cylinder head is fine and you either have a problem with your work or the block, you may have to seek out other solutions. So once again, if you run into this problem on a Honda, all those of you out there that may be in the same position, check for air in the cooling system first. There'll be a link in the description, not only to an article that I wrote extensively about this, but also I have videos about how to bleed the air out of the cooling system on that very engine that could also help you. So as far as bleeding cooling systems, I will say this. People that watch that see that I open up a bleeder valve when I'm filling the system. Bleeder valves are there mainly to make filling the system easier. They don't necessarily bleed the air out of the system. So it's not running the engine open the bleeder valve unless instructed by the manufacturer, unless that's part of the service procedure. But 9 times out of 10, it's to make it so that when you're filling the cooling system, the air has some place to go as it's being filled. Otherwise, as you're filling a cooling system that doesn't have a bleeder valve, those bubbles and that air will try to escape through the same place that you're pouring the coolant in, and it'll just sort of bubble up and bloop, bloop, bloop the whole time. So bleeder valves are not necessary. So in other words, if you don't have a bleeder valve on your cooling system and you're trying to bleed the cooling system, don't worry about it. Cooling systems with expansion tanks, that means that instead of having a radiator cap and a radiator, they've got it off in a tank somewhere. And a lot of German vehicles do this. Some domestic vehicles, General Motors uses it quite often. I use that expansion tank as I use a spill-free funnel when I do the bleeding procedure. I use the expansion tank as that spill-free funnel. So I don't use the spill-free funnel on those systems. I just use the expansion tank as if it was the spill-free funnel and follow all the same steps in the procedure. They'll be outlined in the video that I'll link down for you below. Okay. Sean Sattler. Okay. 94 Cord LX. After replacing the motor mounts, I realized that my engine idles roughly. I've also heard that this model has balance shafts belt driven. Could it be the PO removed the belt, or it's out of time? Could that cause a vibration at idle? 4-cylinder engines, I'm told. Anything over 2 liters needs a balance shaft. So if it's a 4-cylinder engine, remember I said 4-cylinder engines are choppy to begin with. Anything over 2 liters has a balance assembly of some way, shape, or form. The Cord engine that you're talking about here does have a balance assembly. Although it's highly unlikely the belt was left off, it would run very, very badly if it did. However, I have seen instances where people didn't get the timing on that balance shaft right, and about 2,500 RPM. So if you've done a timing belt on one of these, you replace the balance shaft and you're accelerating about 2,500 RPM, you start to experience a vibration, the timing is off in the balance assembly. Now, I've also written extensively about idle problems and specifically about Honda idle problems. Engine mounts are the last place you go. Now, it's a manual transmission, it's a 94. I can understand why you need engine mounts. I get it. However, if you're trying to solve a rough idle issue by replacing engine mounts, to me, that's the last thing on the list. You want to address all the engine performance issues first. And if you still have an issue with the vibration, then go for the engine mounts. So do put that down at the bottom of the list. Go through your tune-up items such as your plugs, your cap and rotor. Don't replace Honda wires if they're original equipment. Just leave them alone. And if you do replace them, I recommend NGK wires. Also, valve adjustment. We talked about that earlier. That can help smooth out an idle, particularly on an older vehicle if it hasn't been done in a while. However, if it's one of those engines that has been neglected, like I mentioned earlier, that hasn't had the oil changed in a long period of time, it's possible that that valve adjustment is going to get very difficult because the adjusters get all gunked up. So when you go to try to adjust things, they don't adjust properly. Everything is stuck. Everything should move smoothly. If it doesn't move smoothly, you're in for a long afternoon. I can tell you that, of trying to adjust those valves, and it's anybody's guess if you actually get it correct. So yeah, I've checked that article that I have that I'll put down in the description about idle issues, and then go to the section specifically about Honda idle issues. Go through that checklist and see where you end up. That's what I would recommend for you. David G, 90 Integra GS. Intermittent wipers don't work. It's a pain to flick the wipers on and off in light rain. Wiper switch has 3 positions. First 2 are normal speed. Third one is fast speed. The first 2 positions are the same as a symptom. Where should I look for a fix? I've actually owned 5 Acura Integras. Love those cars. Okay, that being said, the switch for the intermittent operation is actually, I believe, in the motor itself. And I have seen problems similar to this that sometimes happen in the motor, but I believe the intermittent function actually runs through the integrated control unit behind the fuse box. So it could be any number of things. And what you have to do in this instance is you have to check the signal coming out of the switch to see if it's coming out of the switch. It sounds like it is, but it's either the intermittent control unit, I think, that's not sending the signal to turn on and off, or it's the switch inside the motor that says what position the motor is in. That signal's not getting back to that control unit. It could be causing a problem. I would say that I can only guess here. Without actually testing, I can only guess, and I would say maybe a motor is where I'd be looking, and possibly the integrated control unit, because the integrated control units around that vintage did have issues from time to time. And as I said, it's behind the fuse box. It's actually plugged into the back of it. It's like a little white box on the back of the fuse box that could have something to do with it. But without further information, it's difficult to say. I will, however, also have a link in the description to an article I did about solving electrical issues. First step, find yourself a diagram of how the circuit works and trace things down from there. If you're going to throw parts at it, then you're going to throw parts at it, and you're going to roll the dice and figure out how much money to spend. So if you roll the dice and put a motor in it, don't be mad at me because it doesn't work. Because I didn't exactly say replace the motor. I suspect the motor could be a problem. All right, Jason Guri, is my alternator bad? Or the voltage regulator? It will only show 14.7 volts at the battery when you blip the throttle past 2,000 RPMs. When I first start the car, it will not charge the battery whether it sits for 1 minute or 1 hour, i.e. showing 12.7 volts at the battery or lower when running. If you blip the throttle and get it to charge, when it does charge, it's perfectly fine until you turn the car off and start it again. Same issue every time. Same issue on 3 batteries I tried. 1.9 liter VW Passat diesel. P.S. I'm really hyped about the Fairmont videos. I'm hyped about that too. I just bought some wheels for it today. Not to mention the transmissions come together. Don't get me started on the Fairmont. I'll talk about that for a while. Anyway, I think this is a normal condition, especially at idle, because what you want to do is you want to try to turn all your electrical loads on, like turn the AC on, turn the wipers on, turn the rear defroster on, turn on electrical load, headlights, and then see what happens. That's how you really want to check the alternator. What you're experiencing may be normal, because if you're going to spool the alternator up so that it starts producing electricity, it puts resistance on the engine. That resistance on the engine affects your fuel economy. Perfect example of this. One time I had the opportunity to drive a 2000 MDX from Cincinnati to Buffalo. And it was a really nice ride. It was new at the time. It was really cool. Now, that has a DVD player in it. It has a bunch of fancy climate control stuff in it. It has navigation in it. When I drove up, I didn't have any of that stuff on, and I got relatively good fuel mileage for a vehicle that large. But when I drove back and I had the DVD player on and I was playing with the sat nav and all that other stuff, fuel economy dropped significantly. Why? Because those electrical loads equate to mechanical loads on the engine. Mechanical loads on the engine use more fuel. So a lot of the strategies that companies have are to try to save fuel whenever possible. So if you're sitting at idle and you don't have any electrical accessories on or anything like that, what's the point of having the thing putting out full pop voltage? It's 12.7 volts. That's not bad. In fact, that's fine, just sitting there at idle. But if there's electrical loads on the system and it's only 12.7 volts, then you might have a problem. So you really have to adjust your strategy as far as whether or not this is actually a problem or not. It may be normal operation of the vehicle. So you want to make sure to test it properly. Once again, video link in the description to testing alternators, probably a couple of them actually. Joshua Campbell, when's the next meetup? That's not exactly an automotive question, but I will answer it since it's an easy question to answer. It'll be in July, usually the second week of July. I haven't set a date yet, but keep an eye on my newsletters. That's usually where I make the announcement and put the sign up out there. I just like to have RSVPs so I have an idea of how many people are coming, so I know how many hamburgers to buy. Tom Smith, hey Eric, hope you enjoyed your vacation. I did, thank you. I have an 05 Volvo CX90 2.5 turbo with 116,000 miles. Occasionally when I drive the car, the cluster says brake failure, stop safely. Then the transmission defaults to fourth gear and the dash lights up like a Christmas tree. If I turn the car off and restart it, it drives fine. I checked the transmission fluid and it's at the correct level. Checked engine light codes are for ABS and ECM, no communication. It seems like ABS module is a common failure on these cars. What should I do? Thanks. I looked this up before I started the show, and I'll say that it would have been great to have the actual codes that you pulled, because that would have given me a better direction. I tried searching with your description and I couldn't really come up with anything. I'm not as familiar with Volvo products, so I can't say whether or not it's a problem with the ABS module, but it could be. It certainly sounds like electrical in nature. It certainly sounds like control unit in nature, but exactly what the issue is, it's hard to say. Control units getting bad information can also be a problem. So it could be, as I said, it could, like no communication, could be a bad wire somewhere. It could be that ABS unit or whatever is faulty. I really couldn't say, honestly. If I'd had the codes, I might be able to give you more information, but I did look it up and I couldn't really get anything from what you were mentioning. Sec. Yeah, sorry if I mispronounced that. Hey Eric, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too. My 2004 Honda Accord, same as an Acura TSX US 2003 to 2008. I'm familiar with it. Has a stuck fuel door. When I pull the lever, it just won't move at all. So I'm unable to open with the lever. Where should I start? There is a cable that runs from that lever to the fuel door assembly, and there is a small plastic tab that comes out and holds the door in place. What can happen sometimes is the metal tab that the plastic tab goes into on the back of the fuel door can get stuck. And whenever you're pulling the lever, it's not pulling it far enough because maybe the metal tab on that fuel door is bent enough to where it's not allowing it to come loose. I've seen this several times, actually. My first step is to get in there. I usually take my pocket screwdriver. I usually take a shop rag and put it up against the finish so that I don't damage the finish. And right towards the part that's just opposite of the hinge, so just draw a line from the hinge straight over, is where it goes into the body. So I just try to pry back on that ever so slightly and try to pry the door open. Once you pry the door open, have a buddy pull the lever and watch that little plastic tab that I'm talking about. See if it moves. If it moves when you pull the lever, the cable's fine. You just need to make a slight adjustment to that fuel door. So the metal that little tab goes into, just bend it back in ever so slightly. And I see this happen. Accidentally, it gets bent. It's very weak, can bend easily. Especially, when you're, taking your gas cap off, something like that. Anyway, try to bend it back ever so slightly, put it in and see if you can get it to the point where it opens on a regular basis. It's a simple adjustment, may not cost you a darn thing. Adam the car guy, really? It's nice to know I inspire such followers. Anyway, 94 Acura Vigor LS, and there is an engine light on. I made the female connector for checking codes for OBD codes, that blue connector with the loop, which is like the one you made. The problem is I have the female connector, but I can't find the male connector. I looked for 2 hours under the passenger seat, passenger area, passenger footwell, blah, under the glove box. I watched your video. I'm pulling Honda codes without a scanner, couldn't find it. I have the female connector in my hand. I can't find anywhere what I'm looking for with the male connector with the 2 little hole slots. I know exactly what you're looking for. Because I don't have a scanner's not going to hook up to it. It's OBD1. All right, basically you can't find the 2-pin connector. The video you want to watch is the one where I replaced the blower motor on the Vigor, because it's located on the passenger side. If you're sitting in the passenger seat, just take your left hand and put it up against the console. There's where the console meets the carpet, and pull the carpet down there. It's right behind that side. Acura Vigors had a weird location. And also some Civics and Integra had that same location. So if you have an Integra and you're looking for that same blue connector, that's where it's located. But for you, yeah, it's you just pull the carpet down where the console meets the carpet on the passenger side. So if you're sitting in the passenger seat, reach your hand over and pull it down. That blue connector should be on that harness somewhere. If you're confused about where it is, like I said, watch the blower motor video, especially the first one where I take the dash out. I say, this is where the connector is. I actually point it out in that video. I'll put a link to that in the description. It's actually a 2-parter. Might even be 3 for you to check that out. Rafael Neves, questions about torque specs. I noticed that some of the work you do, or work you've done, you didn't apply torque specs. Example, hub assembly. Is it important, or do you just go by feel? stay dirty. You know, it's funny because over there I have a list of videos that I plan to shoot, and one of those videos is called Torque Nazis. So there will be an ETCG1 video at some point addressing this very issue because it does come up quite often. Yes, engineers make torque specs for a reason, and they should be adhered to, and especially if you're inexperienced. I'm going to call myself an experienced person, and I've done a lot of mechanical work. And as a result, you develop a feel for things. And that's not something I can necessarily convey through my videos. Are there times where I should be torquing things that I'm not? Yes. Is it always a critical issue? No, I don't think so. And that's why I don't take as much time with that. I mean, if you're working on your own vehicle and you want to go around with every fastener with a torque wrench, have fun. But I think, well, at least for me, working professionally for a number of years, breaking out a torque wrench for each and everything, Now, I would use torque sticks on my impact guns, and I've been doing that lately in my videos. But however, when I would work on, like, say, an Acura NSX at the time, that was like a $90,000 car, and that would come in, and I swap the wheels on that, I would definitely bust out my torque wrench and torque those wheels down. So it really depended on the application. I wasn't going to do the same thing to somebody's old beat-up Civic, but I would do it to, you know, the $90,000 car. So for me, it's always been what I'm working on and what it is that I'm doing. Head bolts, always, absolutely. But water pump bolts, not necessarily, no. And in fact, I've just run those down with a 1/4-inch air ratchet. I don't know how many times. Or if I just a 1/4-inch ratchet. That's the other thing. And I'll go into this more in depth in this video, but it also depends on the size of the tool you're using. So if you're working on a teeny tiny 8mm fastener and you're using like a 3/8 drive thing that's like this flipping long, it's going to be real easy to over torque it. But if you're using smaller tools, you're less likely to do that. But as I said, I've got a video forthcoming on that. Can't say exactly when it's going to come out, but it is on my list. All right. This is the part of the show where I'm actually, like I said, it's normally a half hour, but I'm going to grab a couple of questions from people that have just recently posted and see if I can help them out. The other questions I took from the beginning. Mike Barascoop. Hey, Eric, I have a 2004 Dodge Ram pickup with a 5.7 Hemi. It has very hard time starting. When it starts, it consistently wants to stall, and the only way to keep it idling is to constantly give it gas. When it warms up, it will idle on its own, but will have a very poor idle. This is only a problem at idle. I performed fairly well at wide open throttle. No, so it performed fairly well wide open throttle. No codes available. Short and long fuel trims are at -30. Have you encountered this before? If you've got -30 short and long-term fuel trims, that means it is removing gas, which means it's got way too much gas for some reason. I would be checking for like perhaps a leaking fuel injector, something of that nature. It should be close to zero, those short and long-term fuel trims. But -30 means it's trying to pull out as much gas as it can. So it sounds like it's dumping raw fuel. A quick way to check for a leaking fuel injector is to hook up a fuel pressure gauge, and you don't even have to start the engine, but just hook the fuel pressure gauge up, turn the key on, and then turn the key off. So allow it to prime up, allow the fuel pressure to build, and look to see if that fuel pressure drops. It should hold pressure for a very long time before it really starts to drop, at least 30 minutes. If it starts to drop off almost immediately after you turn the key off, so if it builds pressure and it starts to drop off, you got a leak somewhere. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a fuel injector per se. And the way I make that determination is I block off the return line to the tank. And sometimes I block off the supply line as well to help isolate the fuel rail. So if I've isolated the fuel rail and the fuel pressure still drops, I'm pretty sure I got a leaking fuel injector. But an even easier way to check this out is to pull plugs. If you've got one plug that looks different than the rest of them, maybe even wet with fuel, that cylinder probably has the bad fuel injector. So based on what you have there, I'd be looking at that. Let's see. Wow, 2 different names, same question. No, that's a different question. Let's go down. Project Phoenix Media ran over something on the freeway and put a dime-sized hole into the engine block next to the oil pan. Ooh, swap the engine, or can it be repaired? Without looking at that, I really couldn't say. And the person you want to ask would be a machine shop. And what I would do is, if you can see the hole, take a picture of it with your phone. I'm assuming your phone has a camera. Take a picture of it and try to find a local machine shop, show it to them, and see if they can come up with something. But engine block holes, those are tough, especially if it's cast iron. Cast iron is really difficult to weld. You have to heat it. You don't ask me to weld it. That's not a car question. Okay, Demon Child, 2000 Infiniti G20, hard shifts into drive, reverse 1-2, but once in gear it runs and drives fine. The RPMs run about 2,000 RPMs. I think it's because how the RPMs is. Any ideas? Thanks, Eric. All right, well, Demon Child, I'm trying to figure out exactly what you're asking me here. Hard shifts in drive, reverse 1 and 2, but once in gear, it runs and drives fine. Is it a manual transmission? Is it an automatic transmission? That's what I'm trying to determine here. I'm not sure if I can answer that question, because first I'd have to know what kind of transmission. If it's a automatic transmission, I don't know. I don't know. If it's a manual transmission and you're having difficulty shifting, the first thing I would do is check the fluid and check the linkage from the shifter to the transmission. That's what I'll recommend. That's about as far as I can take that one. All right, I'll do another one here. All right, SI Simi, what, Parthenopaus? I'm not even gonna try. Hey Eric, love the channel. I'm a Canadian girl. Hey Canada, how are you? Eh? I used to live close to Canada, so I knew a lot of Canadians. Anyway, I used to drink a lot of Molson's too. My question is on finding a transmission adapter plate to convert an old 1957 Cadillac Trans to a 700 R4. The car has a 365 V8 in it. That is really cool. Is on finding a transmission adapter plate. There's stuff available out there in the aftermarket, I'm sure. These days we have the internet. A quick Google search is what I would start with. I don't know anybody specifically that does that kind of thing. I don't do a lot of classic car work and of this type, but I can see how you'd want to go to that transmission. You'd get a lot better fuel economy out of it. That would certainly be helpful. Oh, man, that's a cool car too. So I'm sure there's somebody out there that makes some kind of adapter plate that you can do this with. Who it is, I don't know. I tried. Nice Google search. Yeah, what the heck, we'll do another one. We got Condor Folsom, has a 1979 Corvette, and the battery won't last a week. The battery's brand new too. The car sits quite a bit in the winter, but starts right up with a quick jump. Should I start looking for something that is draining the battery, or does it does have an aftermarket sound system? Should I look there too? Thanks, Eric. Your videos are awesome. Well, to make the determination of whether or not you have what would be referred to as a parasitic draw. So if there's a drain on the battery when the vehicle is off, it's referred to as a parasitic draw. I've actually done a video on this. It's actually one of my favorite videos about parasitic draw testing. But basically what you want to do is disconnect the positive battery cable, get a DVOM and put it on the amp scale. Start with the highest amp scale you can and put it in series between the positive battery terminal on the battery cable and the terminal on the cable, and see if you have a draw. And what you're looking for is anything more than 0.5 milliamps. Anyway, or 50 milliamps. But yeah, like I said, that's outlined in there. Now, if the car sits for a long time, it sounds like one of those classic cool cars that you drive on sunny days. You might consider a battery tender. I'm actually doing a tour review test on one of those right now. They're devices that you can hook up to your battery. They maintain the battery. They help keep it from sulfating and things like that when you have a car that sits like this. In fact, they have it set up to where you can just plug it in. And you can always have it hooked up to your battery, but as soon as you get in your garage and you're near an electrical outlet, you plug it in, away you go. Everything's good. So first check for a parasitic draw. If you do not have a parasitic draw, the next step that I would consider is something like one of those battery tender, battery minder kind of things. Okay, with that, I am going to wrap this show up. I want to first thank you all for watching and putting up with my droning on for what has been about 45 minutes. That said, I hope I was able to help those of you whose questions I was able to answer. And once again, if you're posting the questions to the Google Plus event after it concludes, I won't be answering those. Also, if you're posting the questions to the YouTube, I won't be answering those, but please, please, please go to the description. There will be videos. There will be links to additional information, stuff to help you. I actually do want to try and help you, but just click that little see more underneath the video so you can open up the description. There will be information there. Also, EricTheCarGuy.com. They're 24/7, 365 for you. Outside of that, I'm going to wrap this one up. The next show will be on the 20th of January at 7 p.m. Same bat time, same bat channel. So I will close this one out with what I close all of my videos out with, which is, oh yeah, Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, if you want to connect with me socially. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Thanks again for watching, and Happy New Year. I will see you next time.